All right, let's just get right into it with the patch flowchart for 14.18b. You'll notice I have a website now for showing the flowchart. So if you are interested in this type of flowchart, go to tftflow.com. I worked on it over the last 2 weeks. I'm pretty proud on what I was able to put together. So yeah, go check this out if you think it'll help you. I think it will for most people. The way this is set up is there are a couple of different sections based on the conditions that you need to meet or the types of conditions you need to meet. So you have your default options with AD and AP openers. You have your hero augment conditions that enable different compositions, different Ornn artifacts that can enable different compositions, +1 emblems that enable different compositions, and then finally augments that enable specific compositions and what they're good for. So if you think this would be helpful for you, and I think it will be for most people, again, go check out tftflow.com, put a lot of work into it. Let me know what you think. All right, let's get started with your default options. If you don't have any of the special conditions that are listed later in this flowchart, you're probably going to angle one of these 4 different lines. On the AP side, you have Karma Preservers and Ryze Preservers, and then on the AD side, you have Blaster Arcana and 5+ Faerie Kalista, which does require a Rage Blade. One note about Blaster Arcana is that this is a lot more experimental in nature. However, I think this composition is going to become a lot more popular as the patch progresses and people realize just how strong it is. At least I've seen it do quite well in my games. The data for it looks pretty good, even though the sample size is low, but I will note this one is not as established as these 3 other lines. Now, when it comes to these 3 other lines, they all want preservers. So Rakan is incredibly contested on this patch, and all 4 of these default options are looking for an econ augment. So if you go under directional augments here, you can see the very first thing that's listed is economy augment into all 4 of these different lines. You can use a lot of gold. All of these comps want to go to level 9 and be able to hit 5 cost. So there's a lot of different options here. You have precise planning, going long, upward mobility, tiniest titan, and a bunch of other econ augments that also work. If you look at the stats, very good on 2-1. Now, when we talk about Karma Preservers here and Ryze Preservers, both of these comps can use aggressive preservation. Wanted to show that real quickly here instead of covering it later on. Let's go ahead and talk about each one of these individually. So Karma Preservers, what you can do on this flowchart is you can just go ahead and click on the champion. It will take you to a page on Tactics Tools that shows you the composition as well as rough best in slot for each of the units. So if you're not able to find the 5 cost on level 8, you're going to go ahead and drop out of the Milio and Morgana, and then a lot of times you're going to fill out this comp or this board with shapeshifters because Nico is pretty good. It gives Witchcraft to your Fiora, and then Nasus is also a pretty decent tank here. And then once you're able to find Morgana, you will drop out of the Nico and then level up for, there's a couple of ways you can actually max cap here. So on level 9, you're going to play your Morgana plus Milio, and then you can either add Incanter in, this is the cheaper option, or if you have a lot of gold, you can go ahead and add Camille in. That's if you get Camille 2. I think Cassiopeia 1 is better than Camille 1, but Camille 2 is better than even Cassiopeia 2. So that's the main way that you're able to cap this board. Very strong. One of the main options you should be defaulting in this patch. Next up, we have Ryze Preservers. So Ryze Preservers plays around 4 Scholar and 4 Preserver. You can see that Higher Education is quite good here. Surprisingly, Little Buddies is good as well, even though you only play 2 Little Buddies. I guess it's because this comp eventually is looking to play many 4 cost and 5 cost. There's only 1 3 cost on the entire board. But yeah, if you look at the stats, even though there's only 2 Little Buddies, I filtered it out and it still said that Little Buddies was good. So something worth noting here. If you're not able to hit the 5 cost on your level 8 roll down, let's go ahead and show that real quickly here. So if we drop out of all of these different 5 costs, you're going to end up playing Ahri, and then usually you're going to drop out of this Zillion as well, and maybe play something like Hecarim plus Tom Kench here. So you can play Arcana to hold you over. You can also go ahead and drop out of the Tom Kench for Rakan, or not Rakan, Zillion, but that's kind of a case-by-case basis depending on how many upgrades you have in the front line. Usually you want to go 4-4 in terms of frontline backline on level 8, but if you have Taric 2 and Rakan 2, you can actually consider dropping this and playing Zillion, which will help set you up for eventually getting the Morgana and Milio. All right, so this is very strong. Again, one of your other default options for AP. Next up, we have on the AD side, let me go ahead and get started with 5+ Faerie Kalista, since this one is a little bit more well known. So this is your max cap level 9 board that you're going to be aiming for. Before you get to level 9, the main board you're looking to play here is you're trying to fill out these 2 last slots with a Multistriker plus Preserver. I believe the strongest combination is a Akali plus Bard if you have Melio. If you don't have Melio and you're stuck on Tristana, unfortunately, then I believe you can argue for Zillion over Bard and then Jax over Akali. So where is Jax? There he is. So yeah, you can either play Jax or Akali here. I think Akali is better, at least according to the stats. And then again, for the max cap here, you're looking to play Camille, and then you're looking to add Melio plus Morgana. All right, so this is the main board that you're looking to play. There are options before you hit your 5 cost, but this is the final board that you're looking to get to. One other thing I want to mention is that utility does not want to go on Rakan. All right, so when you get things like Even Shroud or Ionic Spark or Sunfire Cape, these are things you do not want to put on Rakan in the late game. Okay, it's fine if you have to put it on him in the early or the mid game before you're able to find 2 proper tank items. But the way this comp works is this armor boosts Rakan's healing, and then also you ideally are healing the Rakan with Gunblade. So you want to increase the value of that HP by providing him a bunch of resistances. So long term, you are looking to build this Rakan with resistances plus Warmogs because he scales with max HP. All right. Gunblade is better than Last Whisper on Kalista because of the fact that you are looking to just make this Rakan immortal. All right. And if you have Gunblade, it's a lot easier to do that. Also, it makes it really hard for Kalista to die to random splash damage in the backline, which is quite helpful, especially against lines like Karma and Ryze. Lastly, in our AD category, we have Blaster Arcana. This is not a very well-known composition. There's not a lot of people that are talking about it. Of course, I'm showing the absolute giga max cap that you're not going to be able to get to most of the time. But even if you're not able to get to this, let's say you don't have your Blaster +1 or the Pyro +1, you're just going to drop the Xerath here and play Tristana. And this level 9 board is actually surprisingly quite strong. Now, of course, this is a fast 9 board. It wants to go level 9 as soon as possible because it does not want to drop any of the existing units on the board if you don't have a +1. If you have one of the +1s, especially Blaster +1, it makes it a little bit easier to fit this on level 8. But otherwise, this is something that once an econ augment, you push to level 9 as quickly as possible. And one thing I noticed about this is you really want your front line to be consolidated. So you don't want to do something like this where you spread your front line across your front row, because what happens is their front line also spreads across their front row, and then Varus doesn't get that much value. I saw somebody do something where they actually only played 2 units in the front line, and then they moved their other front line units back so that everything would wrap around these 2 units, and then Varus plus Ezreal would hit all of those units and do a ton of damage. It looked very, very good. So yeah, just something to keep in mind here. I think positioning matters for this, and I also think that 6 Blaster is worth playing, even if you don't have a Blaster +1, but especially if you're able to get something like Blaster Crown. This line seems ridiculously strong. If you get flexible into Blaster or Pyro, very strong as well. Yeah, if you look at the data on this, it looks incredible, but there's not a lot of sample size, and I don't know how hard it is to get to this line. So this is very experimental in nature. Play at your own risk. All right, let's talk about hero augments. They are no longer as oppressive as they were during last patch. In fact, I would say there's only 3 that are clickable and only 2 of them that are quite good, which is Blitzcrank and Rumble. The Galio hero augment is more of a B tier, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So the first thing here is Honeymancy Ziggs. This is the Blitzcrank hero augment. And before I show you the comp, I just want to mention that there are a lot of conditions for this comp that make it strong. So if we go ahead and do a quick search here, you can see that if you get Mana Zane for Ziggs, that's very strong. If you're able to get Unending Despair on Blitzcrank, that's very strong. If you're able to get Prismatic Ticket, that's not as strong, but pretty good. And then lastly here, you have 2 Tanky, which is very strong. So a lot of really good specific conditions for this line that make it viable. It's not just Zap Attack, all right? Now let's go ahead and show you what the line looks like here. So this is the main way that you play it. You have 5 Honeymancy plus a bunch of Arcana units. If you're playing 2 Tanky, what you do is you drop out of the Ahri and you just play double Blitzcrank. It's that simple, all right? And before you're able to get to level 8, you would just drop out of the Hecarim and play Tahm Kench by himself, all right? So that's the main way that you're able to play 2 Tanky here. It's pretty straightforward. The main way that you play this is so easy to do. It's just 5 Honeymancy plus Arcana units. As long as you remember that, you'll do fine. For when it comes to itemization on Blitz, these 3 items as well as Gargoyle are all very strong. Some other tank items are viable as well, like Steadfast. You're just looking to get 3 items on him as soon as possible if you're playing his hero augment. And again, Living Forge, very, very strong because you can get Mana Zane, and then also you can get Unending Despair. And Unending Despair on Blitzcrank, if I could find it here, right here. Unending Despair on Blitzcrank is incredible because it deals damage based on shields. This guy does nothing but shield himself, and also he's a Vanguard, and Vanguards shield themselves. So yeah, just generally a broken artifact. Lots of different options here. When it comes to Ziggs itemization, you're looking for blue buff, Morello, and then AP, but also Mana Zane is broken. This is the best in slot if you have Mana Zane. And then for Kog'Maw, we've talked about Kog'Maw builds plenty of times over the last couple of patch. You're looking for Shojin plus Last Whisper, GS. This could be IE as well. It could be red buff. It could be a lot of different things if you don't have the slot for anti-heal on Ziggs. So lots of different options here. This is one of the best lines for this patch. All right, next up we have Poor Galio, Deja Vu. So this is a hero augment that generally I do not recommend clicking. This is the only B tier composition that I have on the entire tier list. If you have a Rageblade on 2-1, you can play this. In fact, I probably should add that to the flowchart where there's a Rageblade here because you need to have Rageblade on 2-1 for this to work. But if we go and click on the comp, it hasn't changed all that much for a while. It is just 6 Vanguard, 3 Mage. On Galio, you want double Rageblade plus Gunblade. And then one other thing I wanted to note here is that Marksman toolbox. If you're able to get the Rageblade Fishbone Snipers build on Galio, completely busted. He's able to just kill the backline. It's very, very good. Combat Caster, very good. Also Final Ascension, which is not listed here, is his best augment on 4-2. So there are a couple of augments that would bring this up from like a B tier composition all the way up to possibly S tier, but most of the time it's not going to be able to spike that high if you're not able to hit the right augments as well as hit the right build for Galio, which can be quite difficult to do. All right, last up in the hero augment section, we have Molten Caramel, which is the Rumble hero augment. There's 2 different ways you can play this. So the first way is the way that was always played before this patch, which is your Preserver line. You play 4 Vanguard, you reroll Tristana, and the one thing that's different about this is that now instead of playing Zillion, you're trying to get to Melio eventually so that you can get 3 Faerie for your Tristana. In a lot of cases, I'm sure that's not going to happen, so you're probably going to have to build a 3rd item on Tristana, and then use one of your removers that you get from a PvE round to remove that item over to somebody like Bard and use the Fairy Crown in the future. So just something worth noting is that, yes, theoretically this board has slightly changed because you need Melio now in order to activate Fairy. You did not need him in the past because it was 2 instead of 3. That's the only thing that's changed about this version of the board. Otherwise, the items are the exact same. Positioning is the exact same where you want Rumble on the edge in a lot of cases, and that's it. All right, so you're playing your Preservers and your Vanguards with Tristana carry in the backline. The other option here is 6 Blaster. So this is new. This was not played in the past. And the main thing with this is that you need a lot of resources to make this work. However, if you have a lot of resources, let's say you get really lucky and get Blaster Crown on 2-1 into Molten Caramel Plus on 3-2, and you have the items for it or some other crazy set of conditions that allow you to play this, then this is stronger than the other line, but it's harder to make this work, especially if you don't have the resources to roll for Ezreal 3 and Hui 3 and just have to level up for standard 6 Blaster. That might be hard to do if you are rolling on 6 to get Rumble. So generally speaking, this is not how you're going to play it, but I wanted to note it in case you have the resources. If you do have those resources, then this can be quite strong. All right, next up we have our artifact openers. There are so many of these. I'm sure it looks a little overwhelming at first. We've already covered one of these, which is Mana Zane into Honeymancy. Very good if you're able to put that Mana Zane onto Ziggs. Also Unending Despair into Honeymancy Ziggs. We talked about that as well. There's a couple of other ones that are specific that we should talk about here, starting off with Silvermere Dawn Hecarim. So Hecarim is busted with Silvermere Dawn. Let's just go ahead and start off with that. Let's understand that Silvermere Dawn Hecarim is completely broken. There's actually a couple of other conditions for Hecarim. So if I go ahead and search this here, you can see that you get the +1 emblem for Multistriker, so you can get 7 Multistriker earlier. That's quite good for Hecarim. You also have Unleash the Beast, which again is also an insane S tier plus condition for Hecarim. You also have Fine Vintage into Hecarim. This will only really work if you have a lot of items, but again, is another line that you can go for. for. And then the last one here is if you're able to get Caretaker's Ally into Kassadin, you can play Hecarim Reroll there as well. So there's a lot of different ways in which you can angle into Hecarim Reroll, but the one I wanted to show here was Silvermere Dawn, because Silvermere Dawn is incredibly busted, right? So if I go ahead and click on this here, you can see that there are a couple of other options as well here. I showed 2 items on the Hecarim, BT plus QSS, because usually you're looking to build those 2 items onto him. And then there's a bunch of other third items that you can go for, whether that be Sterix, whether that be GS or Deathblade or Silvermere or Edge of Night. All of these things are really good. So I guess because we are in the artifact section, I can go ahead and just add Silvermere Dawn to him and demonstrate, yes, this is completely broken. If you have this as an option, definitely take it and definitely try to angle it. Even if you get stuck on Hecarim 2, it's not the end of the world. One thing I want to mention, by the way, with this Hecarim comp, most of the time you're probably not going to want to roll on level 7 because Hecarim is a very contested unit in a lot of other boards, and you need to usually wait for other people to die before you're able to actually 3-star him. So you're probably going to want to push to level 8 and just roll on level 8 for Hecarim. Now, in terms of the timing on that, I'm not 100% certain. Maybe you should wait until 4 or 5. But regardless, you should probably try to push standard levels and get the Hecarim 3 on level 8, unless you know nobody's playing Hecarim on their board in the lobby. All right, next up in the artifact starts, we have Warwick Reroll. There are 2 main ways in which you can angle it. First of all, you have Corrupt Vampiric Scepter. I think everybody knows about this one. This is S tier, obviously very, very broken, very good. This is the best artifact that you can have on 2-1. Warwick Reroll, just very strong. There's also Rapid Fire Cannon, so it's not just limited to Corrupt Vampiric Scepter. So if I go ahead and click on Warwick Reroll here, I have a couple of different builds that I'm showing. So you have your best in slot for Corrupt Vampiric Scepter. You have your best in slot if you are playing Rapid Fire Cannon, and then best in slot if you don't have any of those artifacts, but you have something like Prismatic Ticket. Now, you'll notice that in all of these cases, you want Rageblade Titans. However, there are a couple of other items that are acceptable here. You also have Edge of Night, which seems to do reasonably well. I would generally not look to build that on either the artifact options, but you can consider it on the non-artifact option Warwick, which again, I would only play non-artifact Warwick if you have Prismatic Ticket, that or Build-A-Bud or something like that. In every other case, you're probably looking to build Rageblade plus Titans. Most other items are not as competitive as going for these 2 builds plus an artifact. So if you build BT on Warwick, you are going to lose placements, all right? Save your BT for Olaf. It's much better on him. You're looking to play 6 Vanguard, 3 Frost. If you're able to randomly hit a Twitch 3 with good items, you can try to build his best in slot, which is basically Heartsteel Ezreal. You go Jungle, which is blue buff, red buff, and then IE as his last item. Apparently quite good. If you look at the stats on it, it actually looks pretty solid. I haven't seen it in action, but it might actually be quite good, especially in this composition where you only get access to 1 backline unit, or not really that many of them if you are pushing levels, since obviously this is a level 8 board if you take out these 2 Warwicks. So if you are able to have any leftover items for Twitch and he's 3-starred, it can actually be quite good as a carry. All right, next up, we have Unending Despair. There are 2 main lines you can play with this, Honeymancy Ziggs and Blaster Reroll. We already talked about Honeymancy Ziggs, where it goes onto the Blitzcrank. In Blaster Reroll, it goes onto Mordekaiser, ideally, when you're able to 3-star him. He does a ton of damage with it. There's actually several conditions for this Blaster Reroll line, where you're looking to reroll Hui, Ezreal, and Mordekaiser. So let's go ahead and go through those different conditions real quickly here. First of all, you can get your Blaster +1. This enables you to play 6 Blaster on level 8, which we will show. You have March of Progress, which just gives you a ton of gold or a ton of free XP, which enables you to hit the units easier. This is one of the only 3-cost reroll compositions, or maybe the only one in this set that requires you, or ideally you hit 3 different 3-stars. Very difficult to do, so March of Progress helps you do that. And then lastly here, we have Caretaker's Ally into Rumble. This may allow you to beef up your front line with a 3-star Rumble, can be quite good. So those are your conditions for Blaster Reroll. Let's go ahead and click on the link here to the composition. Now, this is the standard level 8 board, but you're going to spend most of the game on level 7. I also want to mention that Triforce is quite good. All of your carries and your tanks are 3 costs, so this is the composition for it if there ever was one. I'm just showing items on Varus because if you have infinite items, maybe you can eventually itemize him, but realistically, you're only putting items on Mordekaiser, Ezreal, and Hui. I would generally prefer itemizing Ezreal over Hui, and then make sure that your Mordekaiser is getting built equivalently with your 2 backline carries here. You need a lot of items to make this work. You need a lot of resources to make this work, so you need to make sure that you are not losing a ton in stage 2 and 3 if you're going to angle this line. If you reach level 8 and you have a blaster +1, you're just going to add a blaster instead of playing Taric, and you could put your blaster crest onto Mordekaiser or any one of your other vanguards in the front line. It's completely fine, and you would just play 6 blaster +4 vanguard. But yeah, this is the most resource intensive composition in the entire game. If you're up a lot of resources from something like loot subscription and you get unending despair from that, that's a perfect example where you might want to angle this. Also, Living Forge can be pretty good. Lots of different options here, but just make sure you're taking something that gives you lots of items and lots of gold. All right, the last artifact I want to talk about here is Wit's End, which you can pair with Rageblade, ideally 2 of them, to play Cassiopeia Reroll. This is not the only condition for playing Cassiopeia Reroll. The other specific conditions that you can look for are learning to spell on 2/1 if you have Cassiopeia plus Rageblade, and then also if you take Caretaker's ally into Cassiopeia, that can be quite good as well. Now, the way this gets played is quite similar to how Shapeshifter Syndra was played at the very start of the set. So if I pull this open here, you can see it's 6 shapeshifters with 2 incanters in the backline, and eventually you're going to be able to play Briar here over Jace. You get your 3 Eldritch, and this is your max cap. One thing I will note is that the stats for 4 incanter are quite good. I still think that 6 shapeshifter is better, but it is an alternative option if you feel like your shapeshifters aren't upgraded enough and you have the incanters. You could play 4 shapeshifter, 4 incanter as a possible option. Also, something you want to consider if you get shapeshifter or incanter +1, it also enables you to be able to play that 4 incanter a little bit earlier. But otherwise, this is the standard level 8 board. When it comes to itemizing Syndra, she's your utility bot. You want to put utility items onto the Syndra, so you get your Shred onto her, you get your anti-heal onto her. Of course, you can just build her like normal. So you could also just go for something like Red Buff plus JG, which I think is Trubis Syndra currently. But in general, you do want to get anti-heal onto her. You want Nico as your primary tank if you can. Swain works as well. If you have to, Nasus 2, of course, is perfectly fine as well. And then Shyvana, I think, is worth going for now after all of the buffs. However, she is not going to be a primary tank for you. You really want to have one of your 3-cost tanks 3-starred, because otherwise the board just doesn't stall as long as necessary for Cassiopeia to stack up her Rage Blades. All right, the next section here is the +1 emblems. These are all the different comps that are enabled by different emblems. As I go through each one of these, I will explain whether the crest or crown is takeable on 2/1. Sometimes only the crest is takeable, sometimes only the crown is takeable, and sometimes both are takeable. So as I go through each of these, I will specify which ones are takeable here. So let's start off with Portal. In the case of Portal, both the crest and the crown are takeable on 2/1. You've probably seen Portal a bunch of times at this point because it's been good for a while now. So you're playing all of the Portal units plus Diana and Nami as your splashes. You get 3 mage, you get your Bastion, you put your Portal emblem onto Diana. She gets the shield, she becomes super tanky, she can farm items from Portal. It's great, okay? If you don't have Diana, you can play Tahm Kench here. You can play Nico here if you're still playing Jace for Shapeshifter plus Witchcraft. You can play Rumble here. There are a number of different options before you're able to hit Diana. Pretty straightforward. You duo carry Ryze plus Nami or Ryze plus Nora. Nami 2 is better than Nora 1. Nora 2 is better than Nami 2, so just prioritize items based on who you have. Little Buddies is still very good, and Econ Augments are very good, especially if you're able to hit a second Portal +1 and can go level 10 for 10 Portal. You pretty much win the game on the spot. But this has been around for a while, not going to go into a whole lot more detail. Next up, we have Faerie +1. So in this case, only the crest is good on 2/1. The crown is not very good on 2/1. If we look at this is new because of the change that they made in the Faerie breakpoints. We already talked about 5 Faerie Kalista before. This is exactly the same thing. The only difference is that instead of this Tristana, we were playing Zillion before, and now we play the Tristana to make sure that we're able to play 7 Faerie. 7 Faerie is much stronger. Econ Augments are incredibly good here. You can see that this is quite an expensive board, especially when you're trying to upgrade both Camille and Morgana and get to level 9. Also, make sure, again, that Rakan only has pure tank items. You do not want utility items on him. You can throw those onto Camille, Morgana, or Hecarim, but you want your Rakan's HP to be as valuable as possible, because the way this comp works is you're really just trying to build an unkillable Rakan. That is the primary purpose here. And by having both Katarina and Kalista heal it, especially with Gunblade, this Rakan basically does become immortal. So make sure that you have pure tank items on Rakan, and that's that's mainly it for Faerie. Next up, we have Witchcraft. So in the case of Witchcraft, the crest is very good on 2-1, but the crown is not. And that's because of the item that it gives, not very good. Hextech Gunblade, just generally on 2-1, not going to be a very strong item. There are two main options here. You have Karma and Ryze. Pick whichever one you have better items for. So in the case of Karma, if you have a mana gen item like Shojin or Blue Buff, she'll probably be better. If you have a bunch of AP items plus red buff, then Ryze is better. When it comes to the differences here, they're not that major. So in the case of Karma, all you're doing is you're just playing Karma plus a bunch of Preservers and Witchcraft units. That's it. There's nothing else on your board, just Witchcraft units and Preservers. Okay, that's it for when you get the Witchcraft +1. Of course, it is always worth playing 8 Witchcraft. So if you have the option to play it, make sure that you play it. Next up, we have Witchcraft Ryze. So similar concept. Again, we're still playing just Ryze. Now we have a portal unit on our board, and then everything else is Preservers and Witchcraft units. So same exact idea where we're still playing around Preservers. We're playing around whatever carry that we have here in the Witchcraft slot, right? So we have Ryze in this comp, and the other comp we had Karma. Same idea between both of them, where you're just playing Preservers, Witchcraft units. And in this case, you actually play Taric, and in the case of the Karma comp, you get to play 4 Preserver instead. And that's it. That's the only difference between the two of these. Next up, we have Frost +1. So in Frost +1, both the crest and the crown are good. So both of these are takeable on 2-1. You probably have seen this before because it was pretty good last patch. Same idea where you put the Frost emblem onto Varus. You're just pairing Frost with Pyro because there's perfect crossover with the Shapeshifter Swain plus Nasus, the Bastion with Shen plus Diana, and then the Blaster with Varus plus Hui. And then you're looking to itemize Olaf plus Varus as your duo carries, and then Nasus as your primary tank. Leftover carry items go onto Diana. Pretty straightforward. Make sure that you click on Winter is Coming. Very strong augment right now. And yeah, that's it for Frost. Next up, we have Multistrikers. So Multistrikers, there's two ways to play this now. Both the crest and the crown are like okay on 2-1. They're not great, but they're definitely takeable if you have a good spot for them. You have Hecarim Reroll and Multistriker Reroll. The only difference between the two of these, so they're the exact same composition. The only difference is how you're deciding to push levels. So if you decide to play Multistriker Reroll, you're looking to either reroll Ashe plus Jax, which means you're rolling on 3-1 on level 4, or you're looking to play around Kassadin plus Akali. One thing I will note, by the way, Kassadin Biss has changed. Kassadin Biss has changed. QSS still very good. Hodge is very good, better than BT now. Nashor's is very good. That's been true for a while. But also the big thing here, Titans. They reverted the nerf to AP on Titans. It is very good on Kassadin. Make sure that you're not building Rageblade BT QSS anymore, okay? You're much better off with a build like this on Kassadin now. Just wanted to note that. So the other thing, of course, is that you can play around level 6 and reroll Akali plus Kassadin. But the main idea here is that you're staying lower level and then pushing later on. Whereas if you're playing around Hecarim Reroll, you're looking to push to level 7 or level 8 even, and then you roll for the Hecarim at higher level. You're more likely to hit your 7 Multistriker sooner, and you're more likely to be stable earlier in the game, okay? So those are the two main lines that you can play with Multistriker +1. Next up, we have Chrono +1. Both the crown and the crest are okay on 2-1. They're not broken, but they're okay. The main thing with this is just playing 6 Chrono plus Preservers. That's it. You're just playing a bunch of Chrono units. Everything else is a Preserver with the exception of Milio here, and that's it. That's literally all you're doing. Pretty straightforward. You'll notice that a lot of different compositions on this patch are playing around Preservers. It kind of is what it is. Next up, we have Blaster. So when it comes to Blaster, only the crown is good. And the crown is busted, by the way. The crown is one of the best augments you can get on 2-1, but the crest is not very good. So make sure you understand that. There's two ways you can play this. You can either play 6 Blaster Reroll. So this would be dropping out of the Taric here and playing something like Smolder, and then putting your Blaster crest onto any one of the Vanguards here. I won't mess up again and put it on Rumble. I know I did that earlier in the video if you caught that. Anyway, 6 Blaster Reroll is your first option. You need to have a lot of resources for this to work. The other option is the 6 Blaster Arcana board that I talked about before. Not going to go into a whole lot of detail on that again, but it's the same concept that we talked about before, where now you're looking to get that Blaster emblem eventually on Xerath if you can, but of course that doesn't really happen easily until level 9 because you don't really want to drop this Hecarim. So just something worth keeping in mind here, that Blaster Xerath is very strong if you're able to get to level 9 and play around this. Even if you don't get this Pyro +1, is a very strong board. Next up, we have the Warrior +1. Both the crest and the crown are takeable here. You're looking to play 6 Warrior warriors with this. I do not recommend playing 4 warrior, generally speaking. And you're looking to duo carry mostly Fiora plus Katarina. I guess Gwen works as well, but Gwen is kind of weak right now. In 6 warrior, she's still going to be itemized in a lot of cases over Katarina, but it's, yeah, I mean, if this Gwen unit has a lot of problems. Make sure that you're prioritizing getting items onto Fiora, and I still think there's a chance that Katarina is better. I haven't played enough of this or seen enough of this to know. There's a chance that Katarina 2 is better than Gwen 2, but I don't know for sure on that. So yeah, you're looking to itemize Fiora plus Katarina plus Gwen. I don't think you really want to spare too many items on tank items. You're just looking mainly to itemize your warriors, and then ideally Milio is able to itemize everybody else that hasn't been able to get items yet. The Fairy Crown also makes it easier to itemize Katarina, which is nice. So this is something to play where you have a lot of combat augments and you have a lot of melee items on 2-1. You can definitely take that Warrior Crown or Warrior Crest and angle this if you have a good spot for it. And then lastly here in the +1s, we have Pyro +1. Normally when we have seen Pyro +1 in the past, it's always been Pyro plus Arcana, but this is a little bit different where we're prioritizing playing more of the blasters than the Pyro and the Arcana. It's the same concept as the Arcana board, or the Pyro Arcana board, but now instead of just going full on vertical in Pyro, we are dropping some of the Pyro units in order to play blasters. And I think this is better, but I don't know 100% for sure yet that it is. The stats for it look very insane, but this will be something that we'll figure out more about over time. The final section I want to talk about here is directional augments. So once you click one of these augments, you have a pretty good idea on what you're looking to play. I'm not going to cover compositions I already talked about before. So I already talked about all of these under economy augment. So let's go over to prismatic ticket here. The very first composition you might be surprised to see is Bastion Ahri. So this is not a very good comp right now, but if you get prismatic ticket, it goes from being a 4.8 average composition all the way down to 3.8. It's -1 delta. Very, very, very impactful augment here. So much so that it makes the comp actually viable. So if you're able to get prismatic ticket and you play this, there are a couple of things that are different. The first thing is that Ahri gets built differently now. You want to build her as a typical blue buff carry. You're no longer going for double adaptive. Adaptive Helm does not tick up mana while the user is casting. Okay, so it doesn't work like it used to. It's not good like it used to be. You're looking to build Ahri just as a typical blue buff holder. You want your utility to go onto Zoe or your frontline. So ideally you're able to build Shred, and then you can either secondary carry Zoe, but realistically that's not that good. In the late game, you would ideally secondary carry Ryze or Milio. When it comes to tanks, Lilia is slightly better than Poppy, but you should itemize whichever one you hit first. And then eventually you want to move your tank items over to Taric 2, as he should be better than both Lilia and Poppy. And this is your final board. Again, only playable if you're able to hit prismatic ticket. Next up, we have Kog'Maw. So this is the new board for Kog'Maw. It used to be that you would play around Tristana. Now you're playing around the Hunters. So no Tristana, no Lilia anymore. I think a large part for why this changed has to do with the fact that the Fairy went from a breakpoint of 2 to 3, and it's not possible to play 3 Fairy with Kog'Maw plus Tristana very easily anymore. So instead of doing that, you now play around Hunters. This is still a very perfect synergy type comp, but realistically, you're not going to be able to get this Diana in most games. In fact, sometimes you're not even going to be able to get to level 8 until pretty late, and in which case you're probably just going to add another Bastion like Taric and not able to get that perfect synergy Diana. It is what it is. Now, you can play this composition with Zap Attack. That's why I'm showing the items on Blitzcrank. Normally, you would want to play Honeymancer Ziggs instead. It's perfectly okay, though, for you to play it with this line. If you feel like you have a lot of AD items, you're not going to be able to hit that Ziggs, or maybe you're really ahead on Blitzcranks, and you just want to push levels to level 6 and roll on 6 or 7, then you can look to play around Kog'Maw instead. Otherwise, usually your tank items are going to go onto Rumble 3 and Nunu 3. And then when it comes to your secondary carry here, can be Olaf or Jinx. Honestly, I think Olaf is a little bit more consistent to want to play around, just because usually you're not going to be able to hit this Jinx 3. It's pretty hard to hit. But if you are able to hit Jinx 3, it can be quite good. And ideally, you're able to hit all of these things. But this is a tempo comp. Okay, realistically, you're not going to be able to win. All right. Realistically, most of the time, you're just playing for top 4. I think this composition has like an 8% win rate. This is not something where you're looking to play to win. You're looking to just play to place in the top 4. Now, there are a couple of other conditions for Hunter Kog'Maw that I want to cover cover real quickly before moving on. So the first one here is too tanky, where you start doubling up on your Nunus, your Rumbles, and your Blitzcranks. Usually you're just going to double up on your Honeymancer units just because that trait is kind of broken right now with too tanky. The other option here is Caretaker's Ally into Kog'Maw. If you do hit this, this is actually strong. This actually moves the composition up from A tier to S tier because you're actually able to push levels, maybe roll on 7 instead of 6 for Jinx, and makes it a lot more likely you're going to be able to get to that Diana in the late game. So the comp becomes noticeably better if you are able to do that. Now we're going to move into March of Progress. So March of Progress, always been a augment that enables a bunch of 3-cost rerolls. We already talked about Blaster reroll. We've basically already talked about 5 Faerie. The only thing with this is now you're just looking to 3-star the Katarina. That's a much higher priority now than it was before. Otherwise, the composition is played the exact same. Okay, so it's the same idea where you're looking to build an unkillable Rakan. You're also looking to build Gunblade Kalista. Same exact concepts. It's just now instead you're looking to play around Katarina a little bit more heavily when you have this March of Progress augment. When it comes to Veigar Vex, the main change here, so this composition has been the same for a while. There's 2 major differences. The first thing is that Honeymancer is way stronger than it was before. You're less likely to play around Arcana now than you were before, where like you would try to force Xerath as soon as possible. They nerfed the Xerath bonus damage, the true damage, and they buffed Honeymancer. And on top of that, generally speaking, this is just more affordable. So you're going to actually be able to reasonably hit the Vex and the Veigar if you don't have to sell for TK2, Hecarim 2, and Xerath. So just something worth noting, this board is more likely to get played in a lot of cases. I think this is stronger than 7 Mage if you don't have a Mage +1. The other thing is that when it comes to Veigar Abyss, I don't think double mana is very good anymore. I think you just want to build blue buff Nashers plus Rabadons or some sort of AP item here. I don't think blue buff plus Shojin or Adaptive is nearly as good as it was in the past because when I go look at the stats on it, it just doesn't seem to be as strong. Don't really have a full answer for why that is, just something I wanted to note. Next up, we have Jinx Wukong. It does still exist. It's still around. And the main idea behind this is the same as it was before, where you're looking to play around category 5, ideally. By the way, I have that right over here as well. And you're also looking to play around the same exact items on Wukong, where you have double Gargoyle plus some sort of tank item here. I think Warmogs is the best one, just so he has some HP to scale with all those resistances. And then your duo carrying Olaf. This is the exact same thing as it was before. You can always, of course, drop out of these Hunters for Preservers if you don't have something like Hunting Frenzy and just play something like Morgana plus Rakan. If you're able to hit them, which realistically in this meta, you're not going to be able to hit them. So it's fine to play this board on level 7. This is going to be your standard option, and you're just looking to 3-star your Wukong and 3-star your Jinx. All right, next up, we have Unleash the Beast Hecarim. We've already talked about Hecarim Reroll, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. The only thing that matters is understand that Unleash the Beast with Hecarim is massively negative delta, like -1. It is completely broken. It is one of the best combinations in the game. You just drop the QSS and get to play Sterix, and it's effectively a QSS that makes the Hecarim even stronger. Very broken. Pretty much an auto-click augment. You're pretty much always playing Hecarim Reroll if you get Unleash the Beast. Next up, we have Draconic Mastery. So Draconic Mastery is a little bit different. This is a new line where you take this augment that as you get up to 60 takedowns, you will get a Smolder. And that is really interesting because it guarantees that you're able to get 3 Dragon. Also, they buffed Namzi, they buffed Shyvana, and they changed Smolder. I don't know if he was really buffed per se, but they had to change him and buff him in the B patch. Regardless, 3 Dragon, Shyvana, very good. Best in slot on her is Crown Guard, Ionic Spark, and then BT or Warmogs. And you're just looking to play around Namzi, Shyvana in the early game. And then once you get your 60 takedowns, you're looking to play around Smolder. This is your 6 Shapeshifters plus 2 Blaster backline. You've seen this multiple times in the prior patch. The main difference here is you really want to hit Shyvana 3. Still very good with Upgraded Adventure, where you 3-star Namzi, Elise, Jace, and what was the last unit again? Oh, Twitch. You can 3-star all 3 of those units or 4 of those units, and then play around basically the same idea here. It's the same concept as last patch. The only difference is now you're looking to play around Shyvana. And then we have Find Vintage. This is just mostly if you have a bunch of items. We talked about this before. If you have a lot of items and you could play Find Vintage with any of the Multistriker lines, that is incredibly strong. We talked about Aggressive Preservation before. Learning to Spell. So you have Veigar Vex, very good. Probably one of the best augments for that comp, if not the best augment. Also very good with Cassiopeia Reroll. It's also really good with Ryze Preservers. Not with Karma Preservers, but with Ryze Preservers. Why Ryze instead of Karma? It's because Ryze plays a bunch of Scholars that all scale with AP, whereas the Karma version tends to play around Fiora, which is an AD champion. So the AP is a lot more valuable in the Ryze Preserver line than it is in the Karma Preserver line. And then lastly here, I have Caretaker's Ally. This is the augment that gives you different 2 costs. You can get a random 2 cost, and you'll get that 2 cost every single time you level up. There's a lot of options here. I just want to emphasize that there really is a lot of ways you can go with this. The main new thing here, quote unquote, is that if you're able to hit Syndra or Nyla, you can play Vertical Eldritch. This is pretty niche. I don't think this is going to be something that's very good most of the time, but if you look at the stats, if you're able to get this plus 7 Eldritch, it seems to do pretty well. Good luck getting 7 Eldritch though. The Briar can be kind of hard to hit, but other than that, this is pretty straightforward. You're just looking to play 7 Eldritch plus Arcana, and you're looking to ideally play 3-star Syndra. I think 3-star Nyla is worse, but I don't, honestly, this is something that's like, it seems okay in the stats, but it may not actually be good in reality. All right, this is the first item slam tier list for the patch, where I rank how I feel about slamming these items as my very first item of the game. And this is roughly how I feel about each one of them based on item economy, based on how strong that item is early game, how much direction it provides you, all combined into one final ranking here. I'm going to move through this quickly. There are 2 changes from the last patch. The first one is that Infinity Edge moved from C tier up to B tier, and this is because of Ezreal and no other reason. Ezreal is so strong now with Infinity Edge that it feels good to slam it if you have an early Ezreal and you have a late game plan with Blasters and Arcana or Blaster Reroll, where it didn't really feel like you had a plan with IE in prior patches. So Infinity Edge has moved up, and then Adaptive Helm has moved down after the nerfs that they've made. Usually you're going to want to use these components elsewhere on different items, so I've moved it from A tier down to B tier. Everything else, if you want to hear my opinion, you can go back to the prior tier list where I talked about it in a little bit more detail. Finally, we have the 1 and 2 cost unit tier list. This is all about understanding what units you should be holding on to in stage 1 and 2 when you have limited resources and can only hold on to a couple of units. These are generally going to be the units you want to hold on to in S tier and A tier, and these units down here are more situational. So in S tier, we have all of the Honeymancer units, we have all of the Portal units, and then we also have Poppy. The reason Poppy is in there because she pairs with Zoe, and she can also be paired with Nunu, so she's just a good filler unit with the other openers, both Honeymancy and the Portal opener. But the main idea here is that Honeymancy and Portal openers are good, therefore their units are in S tier. In A tier, this is a little bit more generic, where we're looking at just generally good filler units. For example, Elise can help fill out the Portal opener with Jace. Jax is just generally a good unit for multi-strikers. Lilia, just generally good, especially with the Faerie opener now that exists, where you play 3 Faerie with Tristana, and then ideally Katarina, but also Seraphine is an option. Namzi and Twitch, so the Hunter openers are a little bit worse now, but they're still around, where you're looking to play Hunters with Vanguards or Hunters with Shapeshifters. The problem here is that generally speaking, you would prefer to play the Faerie opener if you're playing AD, so that you can try to angle into Kalista, whereas now the Hunter openers just generally feel like there's not a whole lot of lines that you can angle into when you play them, because there's not that many good AD flexible lines that exist currently. They're still in A tier, they're still decent options. It just feels like they're a little bit more niche than they were last patch. And in B tier, these are just units that are more conditional. For example, Ashe and Akali, generally pretty much only good if you're able to play around Multistriker. Zillion, pretty much only good if you're able to play around either Aggressive Preservation or Frost. And then in C tier, these units are very conditional. For example, Cassiopeia and Syndra, you really just need to have a lot of Rage Blades. Nyla, you need to be playing around Warriors. And then in D tier here, Soraka, there is only one circumstance where you play Soraka, and that's if you're looking to play around mages, which mages are still okay as an opener, but Soraka in general just feels like without the Sugarcraft line that they killed in this particular patch, she just doesn't feel like she was before. So generally speaking, this unit is pretty much always getting sold for me in stage 1 and 2 so that I can buy some of these other units. It did not get nerfed though, so it's still playable. You can still play around the mage opener just fine. Just want to note that in general, this is not a unit that you're looking to hold on to unless you're playing for mage opener. All right, that is it for the patch guide. I hope the flowchart helps you climb. Make sure that you bookmark it, tftflow.com. Put a lot of time, like I said, over the last 2 weeks setting up this website. I think it's pretty cool. It's how I think about the game. So if you are able to use this resource and just follow the line of reasoning behind playing different comps and making sure that you have the right conditions for playing those compositions, you will do so much better in your games. It is one of the fundamental skills for reaching a higher level in TFT. That's part of why I set up this resource. So again, would be very helpful for me if you bookmarked the website and used it in your own games. Hope it's helpful. See you next time.